Hi there. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. This show has one simple question. What's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? We explore the depths and breadths of our humanity through that one simple question over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. I hope that you'll join us. I hope you'll enjoy the exploration. And this tune was created for me personally by the incredible Peter Griffiths, one half of the amazing Mind Takeaway. Do let us know what you think. Let us know what you take away. And of course, we always welcome challenges too. Hope to see you on the exploration. Hello and welcome to summer. You can tell I've got this beautiful shirt on. I've been brave today. The weather's pretty awful outside, so I'm going to try and bring a bit of sunshine through a rather leery shirt. So my name is Gary Turner, host of the Right Here, Right Now live show. Got a very, very special conversation happening today. Two quite incredible humans in David McQueen and Frank Douglas. David's pretty new in my orbit, but I'm loving his content. Frank joined me on this show several months ago, and we're here to go where we need to go. We know we're coming up to a tragic anniversary, nearly 2 years on, but we're going to go where we go with this. You know, where are we 2 years on? But also, what are we doing with the workplace? And how did David and Frank make a difference through their respective work? I'm looking forward to learning more about that again today. So as I bring them onto the stage, just a quick reminder as well that we do have an event taking place across the 20th and 21st of July, 2022, down in the beautiful Dorset, UK countryside. It's 2 days of just really getting present, coming together in a co-created environment that my colleague Joe Homstead and I will be facilitating. Super competitive, just really trying to get some humans together. We've been away from each other for so long now, in a safe environment, just to slow down, connect, and even reimagine what might be possible for ourselves, but also ourselves collectively. So without any further ado, let me bring on David and Frank, and I'd love to welcome you both to the exploration today. How are you both? How's David?
I'm very well, Gary. I was just about to Google leeryshirts.com to see if it was available. You introduced us too quickly, so otherwise than that, I'm in a very good place.
Great to hear. You've given me an idea. I can tell you're a bit of an entrepreneur there, David. Like always thinking about the next thing. Love it.
E-commerce, my friend. E-commerce, the way forward.
And Frank, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to it. Really privileged to be in the same orbit as David. He's been my little hero for quite a while, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic.
Likewise.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think maybe, the spirit of the show, as you saw in the introduction, we'll go where we go the next 30, 45 minutes. But maybe if I can start by asking you both in this moment, in the spirit of the show, what is on your heart and mind right here, right now? And maybe I'll pop over to you, David, first of all, and then we'll go to Frank, and then we'll weave these explorations together from there.
Yeah. Right now, the thing that's on my heart right now is curiosity, and how we remain curious in a lot of the crazy stuff that's going out in the world. How do we remain curious but also compassionate? This morning, I wrote a really quick little blog around education, and my curiosity was, why are we putting? I'm thinking of my nephews and nieces and family who are going through exams right now. Why are we putting people through 2 hours of this pained kind of examination in 2 hours after 2 or 3 years worth of study, just to see how they cope under that kind of anxiety and stress? And what does that do for curiosity or future learning or wanting to learn more stuff? That's something that's been on my heart. It's been on my heart quite a lot this weekend as well.
Beautiful. How about you, Frank?
Yeah, I don't know if my coffee wasn't strong enough today or something, but I'm kind of mad today. I'm really mad. Host of things got me mad, starting from my hometown of New York City. I was there a couple of weeks, but I read the paper there every day. Go Yankees! There was a random shooting, people being pushed on subway platforms, crime is out of control, and I'm looking at New York, and it seems to be going backwards. Mm-hmm. We're 2 days short of the second anniversary of George Floyd's murder. I look around me in the corporate world and society in general, but the corporate world, and I'm like, did we really move the dial? or was it just a sugar high? And I think we were on a sugar high back then. I'm mad about the state of the D&I profession. I speak to enough D&I practitioners, and we're focused on gender. And I'm like, really? Can't we walk and chew gum at the same time in this profession? So yeah, I'm just mad today. I'm really I am. I really just I just look around me, and for my time on this earth, and I'm saying 2022 May 23rd, this is where we are. I'm not happy about things. I'm not happy about things.
Thank you for sharing where you're at, Frank, and also David. For me, it's really interesting. That's why I love these shows where we come from a place of just that in the moment exploration, because I see already a powerful weave, right? If we think about that frustration, Frank, how much of that comes from this complete lack of compassion and curiosity that the systems have actually squeezed out of us for the last 100 years, right? Like, where is that curiosity? Where is that compassion? We've not that space hasn't existed in most spaces as we've grown up, for me.
No, let me just bounce off the back of Frank as well, because I'm a big fanboy. So let me just put that out there in just case anybody is unclear and unsure about this. I love what Frank said, because and it actually reminded me of the scene from the Avengers. There's when all the Avengers come together, and I think they may be fighting in New York or whatever the big metropolis cities, and there's this massive alien invasion. And a couple of the Avengers turn to Hulk and they like, look, bring out the angry guy because we really need him now. And he's like, what I need to tell you is I'm always angry. I'm always angry. Yeah. And I think it was the writer James Baldwin who made a comment that when you actually look at when you are exposed to or understand what actually lies underneath, in America, for example, he said, I'm always angry. And I guess to kind of like reflect on the point that Frank made, it's incredibly frustrating. And one of the reasons why I will go to humor, one of the reasons why I will go to curiosity, one of the reasons why I will step outside of this is because if I don't, and I will say sometimes, I think some people probably think I'm joking when I say this on LinkedIn, but I restrain myself, because if I do let go, when people say bring your whole self to work, I'm like, you don't want that, because that's utter chaos, right? You do not want that from me. So being able to control that is, unfortunately, it's part and parcel of what we have to do, because when you do look at that angle, when you do look at what's happened in Buffalo, when you do look at what's happening in the Supreme Court around Roe and Wade, when you do look at the cases that are happening here in the UK, when you look at Section 60, that's allowing the police authorities to be able to just go with no control in the UK and just say, right, under Section 60, we can arrest anybody, and which demographic is going to get arrested. When you're thinking about Rwanda and people being exported there, you look at all these things. When you look at the chancellor being on the rich list and telling people that they need to control their budgets and find other, you look at that stuff. And again, I just have to take a moment, because if not, I'm just going to be perpetually angry, and I just have to take a moment out from that. So I hear you, Frank. I just have to.
Yeah. So this is going to be a feel-good session. It seems like, Gary. I can tell already. And so yeah, because I think it's misleading for people to put just try to be in a good place and try to feel better. It's interesting. One of the things that haunts me, and I say that literally, is I remember this goes back a couple of years, and part of my work and like David's work is when you're trying to change the culture of an organization, you have to speak truth to power. And part of what we do is we hold a mirror back up to the organization, and that's always a difficult conversation. But I'm still left with the managing director of a major company, and he says, Frank, yeah, we like working with you, but the problem is, I look at you, and then I look at my head of D&I, and it was a woman, and he said, the difference between you and her is that she makes us feel good about ourselves. And that's a quote. And I tell you, and I say this literally, about once a week, when I'm laying in bed before I go to sleep, and I think of all the things I'm trying to do and everyone else is trying to do, that still haunts me, because that was real, that was from his heart, is that she makes us feel good about ourselves. And I'm thinking, is that where we're at? Is that where we're at? And is that what CEOs want? And is that what D&I in-house practitioners have to play to? is that tension between trying to have difficult conversations, but also making the CEO and the executive and the MDs feel good about themselves. And that's still, it haunts me. And so you were on my mind. That's always on my mind. After I come back from a difficult conversation, I'm saying, should I make them feel good about themselves? 30 minutes from now, it's like, should I have made this audience feel good about themselves? And hell no. Hell no. I mean, Buffalo was a massacre. A massacre. How many UK corporate CEOs have you heard speak up about it? How many organizations, or for anyone listening, raise your hand if your CEO sent out a message saying, as Black and brown staff, are you okay? I would say the answer is less than one. Less than one in the FTSE anyway. And we need to push harder. We need to push harder because it's not moving. And so I'm gonna use that to segue to the other thing that really pisses me off, because I'm really pissed off today, is the Parker review. Talking about people feeling good about themselves. I went on LinkedIn and saw all these kind of complimentary pat on the back. Yeah, the Parker review. We got one Black person on a FTSE board. Well, 2/3 of the FTSE board. We're making progress. No, it's 2022. One. That whole review has such a low bar that it shouldn't have even been put out there. It was such a low bar for the establishment, so the establishment could feel good 5 years later and saying, hey, look, we've done okay. And the other thing is, if you look at the people who've been put on those FTSE boards, all of them were ready and qualified 5 years ago. They didn't change their stripes in the last 5 years. They didn't become high potential, if you wish, if you look at their backgrounds, and I don't need to call out the names, but if you look at their backgrounds, they were qualified 5 years ago. And so, I look at that, and people, look at that as kind of a statement of progress. No. We've set the bar just too low, and we're rallying around any little crumb that we can to feel good and to make them feel good about themselves. And that's the connection. Is that I just, I'm tired of making people feel good about themselves.
I've already got a name for that report, Frank. I've called it the Park That Review, because that's what they need to do. They just need to park that because it's rubbish, absolute rubbish. And to your point, sorry if I jumped over you, Gary.
No,
To
please.
your point, there is I've got to the stage where I've just said to individuals, if you're not going to do the work, let's just part ways, because I can't be bothered. I'm not putting my name out here. Just pay me my fee plus reparations plus VAT and let me keep it. I've got the time to sit here and be in a discussion with you where you are just massaging egos. Interestingly, today I'm just my editor is nervously going through an article that I've written called "Letters to a Young Black Lawyer," and I've already been told by all the big law firms that there are people out there waiting for me to actually publish it, because I told people I'm going to do it. I'm like, of course I'm going to do it. Like, if I'm in an organization, and here's the thing. To your point, Frank, about the low bar, there's a real drive by individuals to water things down. People love to water things down. You challenge them and you rock the boat, and they want to water things down, and they want it. And I'll play a little game. All right, I'll play a little game, and the little game is okay. So you want a business case? All right. I was a former accountant. Let me show you what the business case looks like. Let me talk to you about KPIs and metrics. Retention, the amount of money that you don't have to pay signing off NDAs and getting people sacked because you haven't done the wrong thing. Let me show you the business case. Let me show you how 6 and 7 figure sums you can save by doing the right thing, but also being able to go and attach it to the customer reach to make sure that you've got the right stakeholders, all the kind of internal and external comms. I can give you the business case. But beyond that, oh, by the way, Gary, how calculated is my language in here? Am I allowed to slip out every now and then?
This is... You need to express what you need to express. You go where you need to go.
I won't.
Don't give David free range with language. I've seen what happens with that.
Go where you need to go, mate.
I'm gonna limit it. But it's bullshit. It's bullshit. If you're not gonna do the right thing, just stop pretending. absolutely stop pretending. And to Frank's point, I go into organizations, and I'll tell you this, and sometimes I have to laugh, but the amount of times people have said to me, do you know what? Yeah, we've looked at the stuff we've seen on LinkedIn and we're quite intimidated. I'm like, you're damn right you should be intimidated. You absolutely do, because if you're not doing the right thing, be intimidated, okay? If you're just intimidated because I'm a 6'2" tall black guy standing over you, we can have a different conversation, right? But if I'm holding up a mirror and saying, you said you're going to do something, you came up with your lovely black squares and promises and funding and all the rest about 2 years ago, and 2 years on, really? It is what it is. It's gone into this milk toast, BIPOC melting pot of stuff, and you haven't even dealt with the promises and pledges that you were going to do. Be honest. Stop speaking out of both sides of your mouth. And if you're not going to do something, then at least say you're not going to do it. And for me, that's honesty. That's integrity. Those are all those things that people have down as value pieces on, on the organization. If those are the things you're going to stand by, then stand by it or take them off, because no one else is being fooled. Yeah. Well, Frank has got me angry now, man. Come on, Frank.
No, I want you to feel good about yourself.
No. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to echo that.
And I think picking up on that, David, is that I think organizations aren't being honest with themselves, because they only have 3 options, if you wish, and they've picked the middle one. And the 3 options are: they can outright reject the whole diversity and inclusion momentum that's taking place. They can say, no, we're not going there. Now, that's not acceptable by stakeholders, shareholders, or employees. So they can't have outright rejection, particularly around the race conversation. So what they're left with, they're either all in, or they just have lukewarm acceptance. So they kind of tick the box: shareholders, employees, the employee resource groups get some money, and they've done a listening session where they've traumatized all their Black employees, and they come out feeling good for themselves because we went through that trauma with them, and so we won't touch their hair anymore. So what they're left with is lukewarm acceptance, and that's what we're dealing with. That's, we think they're all in, but they're really just a step away from outright rejection, because they don't think, there is a business case, quite honestly. You got to realize that for most senior executives in their 50s or 60s, for 30 or 40 years, they worked in all white environments. And they worked at all white environments making profit. And they worked at all white environments making profit, being profitable, and being industry leaders. And so for many of them, the last 10 years are like, well, okay, we did okay that way. So are we really going to be better if we add in women and neurodiversity and various social identities and racial and ethnic backgrounds? I don't think they're convinced of it. So it's just lukewarm, because deep down in some of their hearts, I think there's a rejection to this, but they just professionally, can't go that way.
I'd love to add in, if I may. So speaking as the token, finally, white guy in a space.
we welcome you to the cookout, Gary.
Yeah. Genuinely, it's really fascinating, right? Because for me, until the tragic murder of George Floyd, I didn't join those dots either, right? Because I've been in those like myopic white spaces. And what I've really learned over the last couple of years, which has been really interesting for me, and particularly the last 6, we're speaking about this comfort piece, right? We're speaking about this reductionism piece. They are supremacy culture patterns. Tema Okun's work speaks to a trend like this. She's done loads and loads of work around these 18 patterns, including fear, binary either or thinking. They keep popping up regardless of the color of your skin, where you come from in the world. Those patterns are the problem. And if we don't name the patterns, i.e. those senior leaders wanting to stay comfortable, if we don't actually name that and get over that, I think we'll be talking about this again in another 20 years' time with not a lot else changing. I believe we've got to look at those patterns and break those patterns down and understand why those patterns perpetuate.
Yeah, I agree, Gary. And I think one of those low bars, and this is really something that's hit me in the last 9 months, and it's not just senior managers or leaders, it's the profession, D&I and HR, is how we have conflated the issue of diversity and inclusion. First off, we speak them as one, and I think that adds to it. And so as for people in this space, that's our That's our badge, because they're not the same. They are totally different. But what's happened is that if you speak to most senior leaders and you ask them, what are you doing about inclusion? I will bet you the answer you will get will be a diversity answer. You ask a senior leader, what are you doing about inclusion? And they say, well, I've hired 2 Black and brown people on my senior team. And they don't understand that is not inclusion, that's diversity. Yeah. And what you find is that we have not had that difficult conversation about inclusion is a totally reimagining of your relationship with your employees and how you unlock that diverse talent. That is a hard, long road to go down. And we don't let them go down that road. We let them conflate the two, and we reduce it down to a numbers game. And I haven't seen this just in leaders. I've seen this with D&I practitioners. I've seen it on their posts. And, many will reduce it down to inclusions about having a better meeting. So, part of the problem, we can keep looking at, why haven't we moved the dial and blame them? I think if we're going to, to be quite honest, I think we got to hold the mirror back to us. In the D&I HR field, do we actually have the skills and capability to move the dial? Now, for a separate conversation, that's a UK conversation. I think it's a different situation in the US. But I'm wondering in the UK if we have fulfilled our capability to really have those difficult conversations and understand what inclusion really requires. And David, I know you're out there. I don't know if you see any of this.
Oh yeah, 100%. So there was a really good article that I saw you contributed to, Frank, a little while back. I think I picked it up, where there was a discussion around the certification and qualification for individuals who are going to be at the forefront of this work to basically have more than a lived experience in order to be able to talk on this subject. And I confirm, I actually agree with you. And again, my angle is always, or I say always, but especially around my angle around leadership has been around inclusive leadership and getting leaders to understand what that inclusion piece actually means. Because again, as you said, there are individuals who will answer a diversity question with an inclusive question with a diversity answer. And very often people feel that there is a need to be able to tick a box rather than understanding the whole changing of a mindset. And, there are countless bodies of work out there around organizational design, around behavior, around systems. There are so many bodies of work. And one of the reasons why I spend a lot of time doing the work around my piece around inclusive leadership, because I always say, when you're doing all these things, are you actually including individuals who don't fit a certain pattern or the pattern of those people who actually did the research? Because very often, we're seeing all these things now around, provisions in law around, well, I say specifically, I'm going to talk on the European side because the US is a whole different conversation when it comes to women's health and being. But especially in Europe, there is, things like in Spain around things like menstrual leave. There's a lot more understanding about neurodiversity in the workplace, and individuals are seeing it through the lens of, okay, if I'm going to hire somebody or if I'm going to build a bank of talent, how do I do that and either reduce or, where possible, eliminate marginalizing those individuals that I bring in? And how do I get them to have a sense of understanding that works? And comes back to the business case we were talking about, Frank. How do I get and understand that if I do that right, I get more high-performing people who want to stay in the organization, who add value because they understand that they're being valued. And part of the frustration in this is saying to individuals, and I take your point, Gary. I do take your point. I'm not going to make any excuses, because I'm taking the point that you made, Gary, about not necessarily understanding until recently. And I also take your point, Frank, around individuals being at the forefront of this space, not understanding the nuance of what that actually looks like. Yeah. And so it comes from you and I can rage because we know that we're going to come the bits from behind us that go, okay, this is what it looks like next. And part of my frustration when I look across the board on all areas of diversity, on all areas of individuals who are practitioners in this space, is the individualization of their experience to try and solve a problem that's a lot bigger than that. And part of it is that larger conversation where, 2020, I literally had a group of white male friends that I've known for most of my life calling me up and saying, David, I don't understand this white privilege thing. Can you break it down for me? You know, I come from a working class background, and how can I be privileged? I'm like, you live in a 6-bedroom house in Essex. Come on, man. You really want us to have this conversation? Yeah. But then being patient enough to go, all right, do you know what? I'm in this space. Let's talk. Let me expand it. Let me explain these things. And what I've realized, and here's the difference for me, and this is my realization, there is a real appetite, and I'll go back to Frank's point about those who are willing to learn and not reject the ideas because they're too afraid of what it might mean. And those who can sit back and go, this makes a lot of sense for me. Even, and I'll say this now, and I'll put my hand up, even if that sense means that they're driven by what happens on the bottom line, at least they've still accepted it. At least they've still accepted it. That for me is important. It's when you reject it totally,
So let me pick up on the bottom line issue, Dave, because I think that's also part of, you know, we all know the definition of insanity. And so the dial's not moving. So we need to look at both sides, them and us, and figure out what can we do differently.
Yes.
I think so. I know HR people listening, and they're very tactical, those HR folks, and they're sitting here, David, saying, okay, give us a process. We need a new process. You know, help us with a process. I'm not going to give you a process. But here's a thought. Because sometimes what you have to do is be cognizant of how you frame the issue.
Yes.
So you can look at Ukraine as a war or an invasion, and that's one way to frame it. Or you can frame it as genocide.
Yes.
And then you come at it from a different lens that you can't walk away from.
Yeah.
And so part of what we need to do also is think about how are we framing this DE&I conversation. And I know David knows this, and I'm not playing to it, but because he's already spoken to it. We need to start framing this in the way that the CEO and the business can understand it in their language. We got to speak their language.
Yeah.
What are the 3 things I do? So I'll give away some of my IP now. What are the things I do? Because I don't speak to D&I when I'm speaking to a CEO. I find the 3 things that resonate with them, because it's their language, is that if you put this in terms of value creation, ding. If you put this in terms of alpha performance, which is how the city looks at it, the city doesn't want a company that just performs average, which is beta. They want an organization that outperforms their competitor, which is alpha. So you put this in a perspective of alpha performance. Or the third thing you put it in is in terms of organizational blind spot. So when I speak of D&I, I speak about it as an organizational blind spot.
Yeah.
You know, if you're opening up a factory in Malaysia and you want someone to understand the supply chain, the customer insights, and the factory and the regulations, chances are you're going to look for a Malaysian. Chances are. If you don't have a Malaysian on your leadership team or within your organization, what do? You find one. Why? Because that's an organizational blind spot. And so I think as we look at this, we need to move away from the inside baseball language and go to the language of the buyer and the user. And the language of the buyer of user is multidimensional. But I would guarantee you, if you can resonate with them from value creation or organizational or alpha performance or organizational blind spot, if you can get them into that conversation on any one of those entry points, you probably will change the dynamic of the conversation than if you just talk about DE&I and anti-racism per se. Not to knock any of those, but you got to meet your customer where they are.
100% agree. Go ahead, Gary. I will jump. Gary, talk because I will jump in because
I need you to jump in, David. No, I'm just really intrigued by this because the thing for me, I want to come back to your point actually about design. So just as a reminder for those that are watching, so I work in a big corporate, right? So I experience day in, day out the focus on just gender and the frustration that comes with that. I witness day in, day out the inability to look at stuff that isn't high growth focused. And then I look, and I want to put this into the mix today. This is a critical conversation, but what about those extremities of the supply chain where there is genocide taking place at the mining facility in Malaysia, or potentially the plantation taking place in Indonesia, right? Which is getting basically whitewashed with ESG at the moment. Yeah, tick the box, ESG. Yeah, performance done. Fantastic. Let's leave that over there. So yes, you've got the complexity of the Western DEI And then you've got the global complexity of who are those people that actually underpin these global economic systems that are completely out of date, following GDP as a measure, right? So there's so much in this, I think. And I just wanted to pop that into the mix as well. It may or may not be relevant for where we go, but I just wanted to pop that in.
Oh, it's definitely relevant. It's definitely relevant, because you will find that, again, as you said, the exploitation of those systems usually happen in what they would frame as underdeveloped countries, right? So you think about it now, you know, the narrative and the way that is spoken about individuals that don't come from a Western view, the way that people speak about China and Russia, for better or for worse, and India and other in other territories, they're spoken of in such a way that is limiting. So, for example, rather than we focus on, excuse me, developing skills and talents about communication skills in the UK, we would rather outsource it to India because it's cheap and because they will just rock up. Yes, they're educated, but they will rock up and they'll do the work for you. If China said to America now, right, you know what? Screw the lot of you. We're not producing stuff. Apple and Tesla will go to the wall, right? They will, but they will fight. They will fight tooth and nail. They will find, if they need to, they will find a way of making sure individuals end up on those boards, as Frank would say, from those areas, in order to be able to do that representation. And so for me, there is a wider, everybody has all these scorecards, right? And if you business school scorecards, MBA scorecards, we know all the tools, as Frank was saying, then the language that people use. And the convincing bit for me is getting people to understand from A to B, or part of the whole supply chain or part of the whole product chain, understanding what the impact is along that journey. And until they get an expose, people don't care. They absolutely don't care, because if they can get cheap sourced materials and individuals and capital from elsewhere, the reality is they don't care. Look, I'm okay, I won't mention them, but I've worked for and done some consulting for a couple of petroleum companies. I'll just put it that way. In the UK, you probably know which ones I'm talking about, okay? And the way that they have destroyed environments, the way that they have destroyed democracies, for want of a better phrase, in the pursuit of EBITDA, you look at that and you're like, I don't want you ever putting out anything on any of those days around balance, around DEI or anything else, because your leadership sucks to high heaven because you're not doing it right. And to your point, even with ESG now, ESG has become a trend. And the only reason, and I'll tell you this now, I say it with my full chest, the only reason a lot of organizations are looking at ESG is because they know that it might penalize them if they're going to raise money. That's the only reason. The richest man in the world was happy with ESG until they called him out on his BS around the batteries.
Yeah.
He was happy. ESG was absolutely cool. And then all of a sudden, he got called out. He went into his bully pulpit and said it doesn't work. He had to be fair, some of what he said had a bit of mileage, and that it's not consistent. But watch what happens when you go and you attack somebody's bottom line. You start to go on the resources. That's when you will see people on the defense. Yeah. And so for me, part of the joy, but the frustration of being able to walk into those senior spaces is that you can tell them, and that you can point out to them. You can be equipped enough to say, look, here's enough of I can map out in your organization, to your point when Frank was saying about value creation and those blind spots. I can show you where you can actually see where you can create value, or I can show you what you're missing. But there are so many stakeholders at place or in place who don't give a monkeys, and who are only really concerned in the short term. I mean, realistically, if we put the largest organizations in the world, if we really were to sit them down, between them, they could easily sort out climate. Easily. Yeah. Absolutely easily. If there was a financial incentive behind it, it could easily, but short-term profit, short-term capitalism. And so, yes, we are fighting that. And, you know, I think it's small dents that you make in the universe that gradually get there. You make small dents. But yeah, looking on, it can be hella frustrating. But as I said, I'm 53, right? And I'm just trying to make my way out of here quite neatly. Right? I'm gonna call some people up. Right? I'm gonna make my way out of here quite neatly. I want to see my grandkids.
No, very well said, David. And I know your clock is probably ticking there, Gary. And so one or two things I want to make sure I don't leave without addressing. So there is some people I do want to make feel good, and the people I want to make feel good are particularly the in-house Dni practitioners. Yeah, they are tired. You know, they're fatigued. They're beaten up. And we do see them changing jobs quite a bit. It's a hot market, but they're also realizing very quickly that what they were sold is not, what was on the tin. And so, a shout out, and with their permission, go hug your DNI head next couple of hours and days, because it's a tough job, and it's a tough job around the issue, because what they are doing basically, and I have two angles to this, what they're doing is that they're challenging the myth of meritocracy. Can you imagine how deep rooted that myth of meritocracy is that goes, through the corporate world? It's hundreds of years old. White, able-bodied, heterosexual men are the most capable and able people to lead organizations. Imagine having to destack and undo that. And the resistance, the systematic, the structural barriers that are in their way. And they're on the front line of trying to deal with that and to eliminate that. It's not easy outside, and it's definitely not easy inside. Dave and I can crack a couple of eggs and move on to the next client. You crack a couple of eggs internally and it's career limiting. And so I want to have a shout out to them. But on the issue of the myth of meritocracy, I would also say, before any HR or particularly D&I person accept their next job, at the most senior level person you are going to interview with, ask them, do they believe in the myth of meritocracy? That's, every other question is a proxy question.
Yeah.
The most senior person you deal with, ask them, do they believe in the myth of meritocracy? Yeah. And see where they are. And, they can, and look at their body language. I know Dave is an expert on this. After they pause and scratch their head and they do that body pivot, we got gender diversity under control. Yeah. Have that conversation, and that's all you need to know in terms of that job interview and that organization, is where that most senior person sits on the myth of meritocracy. And so, there's my next IP out there to you. Don't leave the conversation without getting an answer to that, because that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So how are you both for time? I'm actually okay. Have you got another 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm good.
5 or 10, because this is so beautiful. I really appreciate both of you sharing. And if I look at my, joining all these different dots, right, this actually isn't that hard, right? Yes, don't get me wrong. We've got years and generations of a colonial mindset. That's what I'm going to point to, right? We've got back to the post you put out earlier about education, David. Everything we're talking about, reductionism, the need to have an either or, all of this stuff just comes from trying to keep, education through to work, through to retirement is about just suppressing and narrowing our humanity from basically age 6, right? And I just see this beautiful opportunity in what we're exploring today to stay curious, to challenge outdated beliefs, outdated stories. And I guess it's how do we create the conditions for that, both for the specific DEI community, but I'm also going to name something else. But the number of people within my organization that are Caucasian that want to be in this conversation, but are but terrified. They don't know where the safe space is. They don't know who to speak to get involved in it. It's really curious for me, David and Frank, the number of people that are actually pretty curious. And I'm like, let's get into dialogue then. I can create a space for you. Let's start talking about what's going on. But for them to take that step means stepping out of that comfort zone. And I think that comfort piece is a really common thread of our conversation today.
Yeah. If I pick up on that and take from the angle that, I am, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool HR professional. Been in the FTSE, and part of the issue, I think, is the HR professions. 2 years ago, what was the challenge that many organizations had is that they had a white board turn into a white CEO, turn into a white head chief people officer, saying, what do we do about this race issue we got? What do we do? And so they were lost because they didn't have that diversity of thought, those lived experiences to deal with the George Floyd situation and the frustration and anger and concern of their Black employees. They never thought about that organizational blind spot. Well, today you still have as the Parker and everyone else, for the most part, you still have a white chair, you still have a white CEO, you still have a white CFO, and there's no black chief people officers in the FTSE trying to deal with the issues of race. And so you're right, Gary, is that organizational blind spot remains, and for a corporate challenge, there is nowhere to turn. And so they just kind of move on to the comfort level of gender and avoid that difficult path of race, particularly because the HR profession just lacks that diversity at the most senior levels. And there's nothing that pisses me off more when I see HR conferences with all white HR panels discussing diversity, or leading HR practitioners, in all white meetings discussing the future of work. Because clearly future work don't involve black and brown people, I assume. But so the profession itself is part of the problem, ultimately the solution, but it's part of the problem when 93% of the profession is white, and we're trying to expand the conversation beyond white women, to be honest.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, to echo your point, Frank, a lot of the time I know when I go into organizations, I say, look, this is not about shame, blame, and guilt, because with those three, it ends up centering you again. All right, with those emotions, it still ends up centering you and just how you navigate that space. And look, any change, anybody who does organizational change in any capacity knows that it's uncomfortable. Okay, it creates disruption, it creates movement, but it's also down to leadership to be able to move you through that space. It's incredibly important to do that. And to pick up on the point that Frank was saying again, around the default to gender. Let's be honest about the default to gender. It's not intersectional. Okay. It's primarily about white women. We've seen it before in affirmative action. There was a lot of resistance, okay? It became about white women. We see that in surrogacy. Suffragettes, the suffragette movement, again, right? The suffragette movement was started because a lot of white women were upset that black guys were able to get the vote and a bit of a room in the space. That's where it started from. And again, this is not to be able to put blame, but let's call truth to power. And there are individuals who say they want to have a conversation, and they're terrified. And I always ask, terrified of what? And people will say, oh, I'm terrified of getting cancelled. I'm like, cancelled from where? From what? What does that actually even mean? And I say to individuals, you can't cancel me. You don't know where my money lies. You don't know what I do. You can't cancel me. And I'm not believing in that stupid narrative. It's an easy, simple narrative that's just put out there in social media and people can jump on it. It's a bit like woke, right? People use the word woke and they've got no understanding of the etymology of the word, but they'll use it, or anti-woke or whatever it is, to try and push back. My thing is, it's about simple, straightforward conversations. The same way you would build a strategy, the same way you build organizational culture, all those simple frameworks that you can have there. And as Frank says, being very deliberate about that, what that framework actually looks like. And a lot of people say they're curious. They're frightened. I always ask them, what are you frightened of? What are you frightened of? What's the story that you've got in your mind that you're frightened? What is it? Are you frightened that you can't use the N-word around me? Is that what your fear is? Are you frightened that if you say black, I might take a step back because you think that my title should be Afro-Saxon or whatever variation that you have on the actual word? What does it mean to be terrified? And for me, when you're having a sensible and nuanced conversation with anybody, you come in with very good intent, but you also build a point of trust, all right? I've been married now for 27 years, and I can tell you now, we disagree a hell of a lot, but we can disagree because we're based on trust. It's based on trust. Even though we may not necessarily see the same way, it's based on trust. And if individuals are really scared, the question I'm asking you, are you scared because you don't trust yourself or you don't trust the environment you're in? What is it that you're really scared about?
Yeah. And if I can just pick that up, David, and take that back to my framing issue, because I do think how you frame an issue, is a big determinant on how it resonates. And so, if I asked you out to lunch tomorrow and said, do you want to go eat some cold dead fish? You might say, I'm not sure I want to go eat some cold dead fish, Frank. What if I said, hey, David, you want to go to a sushi restaurant? You might say, oh, okay. And so I think part of it is that we've been framing this as cold, dead fish quite a bit. And so, part of what I think we need to do in this movement is one, not make this a pass or fail, But in the language of software and product development, this is just an evolution. So you have your iPhone 14, you're going to have 15. And believe me, Mr. Cook, Tim Cook is already working on 17. Yeah. And anyone in software knows, and everyone has software out there, you're on version 14.652. Culture should be just like that. It should just be a product development with a roadmap. So if you're at 2.0, the conversation is, okay, David, typical name of a CEO, David,
wrong color.
We're at 2.0. What are you thinking about 2.5 and what you're thinking about 3.0? And so I think we need to frame this just as we do a lot of business issues as product development, software development, a roadmap. And so culture needs to have its own roadmap. It's not episodic. And I think if we frame it that way, not pass or fail, but just 2.5, let's go to 3.0. I think you can resonate. So I think, again, I think we got to stop selling cold dead fish and put this in a way that people understand what's in their language, in their lexicon, which is roadmaps, value creation, blind spots, alpha performance, things of that sort.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes I love that, Frank. I know that cold dead fish now is your IP, so I'm not touching it. Okay. I also love the concept of sometimes, like to your point of cooking or sport metaphors. Sometimes that's the language that resonates with individuals. Yeah. And I will say to individuals from any background who's the dominant in that organization, what's the common theme? Where can we have that commonality on? Let's think about the things that we have in common. Let's start on that as a starting point. And then once we've got that commonality, let's start to build and let's start to break. But you can tell me things that I may feel uncomfortable with, and I will do the same. No one's going to get shut down. But we've realized that, to your point, that whole thing around framing, you cannot go to a Mandarin conference speaking French.
No.
100%. So yeah, I agree with you. Sorry, Gary, I'll shut up now.
No, you don't need to. Honestly, I'm just like, I can keep going all day, as I think both of you probably could as well. But I'm really intrigued because, like, the significance and the importance of these big tech systemic conversations, right? They are critical.
Yes.
But what it comes back to is the connection, right? Do we even know what it's like to feel with another human being, right? Do we know how it is to be in a space with another human being, vulnerable, not needing to have the answer, not needing to be right? Like, that's what I see quite a lot still within the big corporate world in particular, because we can myopically focus on the number and growth as a way not to feel. It's very easy to not feel when you're just focusing on all of that stuff. So I'm wondering, with this beautiful exploration today, it really feels to me that, compassion, relationships, trust, it's those foundations of being human. If we can truly connect on a human level, but with a conscious awareness of what's gone before and what we're trying to co-create, how different could that be, rather than just hitting the next bloody number?
Capitalism can never be conscious. I'll leave it there.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Love it.
I'm not going to try to follow that.
That is poetic. That's poetic.
I fold. Here's my cards. I fold.
But there is a larger conversation. I think I can't remember who it was I was having the conversation with, but the point is that there has to be the meeting of minds. There has to be a framing, because often we're asking individuals to go into a workplace and to create spaces or be aware of psychological safety when they're coming from environments that they have no idea what that actually looks like. So when we think about our media, when we think about the fact that we have our senior leaders in politics are literally constitutionally taking the ministerial code and tearing it up and throwing it out on the floor and saying we don't want woke this and blah, 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 amongst other things. All this stuff feeds into the larger narrative that we have. And so it does take a real shift. It does take a real mind shift, and it does take some really creative thinking. And here's the thing I always say, for all the people who push back and are afraid and are reluctant to do this, where does all this energy come from when you're asked to be innovative and creative and to find different ways of being disruptive and all the different, verbs and adverbs and adjectives that they will use? All of a sudden we can find that when we want to go to product market fit, or we want to challenge individuals, but we can't do it in the way that we connect with other people. And when I hear that, I just go, it's just you can't be asked. And I am very cognizant that there is a wider community and a wider society that perpetuates a lot of the negativity and a lot of the restrictions that we have in the workplace. But the one thing my dad always says to me, Dave, you either find a way or you make a way. If you want to be able to achieve in this world, you either find a way or make a way. And that's part of my simple mantra. Either you want it or you don't. And if you do, you either make a way or find a way.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, I want to give both of you some last words. Just stunning exploration. Thank you both for showing up so fully, David and Frank, as I know Frank does, and I now know that David does, even behind the compassion and the curiosity. Please, I'd love for you to share a few words. What's your invitation for anyone that's watched us live? We've had a number of people pop in and say hello and share their thoughts as we've gone through. What's maybe a key invitation from you first of all, David, then Frank, as we exit this space today?
Yeah. Why just staying curious? Stay angry as well. That's my learning. That's my learning. So a lot of what drives me is I'm a humanist. All right. So what a lot drives me, I respect people with religions and what have you. I used to be religious. I've moved away from that. But humanism, I believe that there's a lot of the solutions are within us as individuals. We can choose to be selfish. We can choose to be loving. We can choose to be unfair. We can choose to be equitable and just. But like anything in life, we can root for a team. We want our team to succeed in sports. We can root for our country to be victorious in the Eurovision Song Contest. For one of them, we got second this year. Can you imagine England got second? Oh my goodness! Now that was a marketing campaign and innovation. But it can be done, right? It can be done. We got 0 points for many years. We came second. I look at that and I go, listen, Britain, you can actually do something. Look at what we've done in Eurovision. But in all honesty, I do think it's down to really just being compassionate and speaking truth to power as well, and not being afraid to have a disagreement. People are terrified of saying the wrong thing, or if you're surrounded by people who've got your best interests at heart, you should never be afraid to say something that may get challenged. That's how we grow. That's how we develop. So for me, it really is about that humanist part. Stay curious, stay angry, and look for the solution.
That's great. I'm not a horse racing fan, but if anybody watched the Kentucky Derby, and if you haven't,
yes,
go to YouTube and watch it, because that race won by a horse called Rich Stripe sums up to me what this is all about. And next time I'm in person, I'm going to play that as the end, because there, you get to the Kentucky Derby by winning a number of races, accruing a number of points. And this horse was on the waiting list. There's 24 horses in the Derby. It was number 25. And, the odds on favorites had pedigree, just like leaders, they went to Oxford or Cambridge. They had the best trainers, mentors. They had the best stables, the best that money could buy. Their parents were privileged, and then so they were bred together. So the top horses were the favorites there. And Rich Stripe only got in because the Friday before the Kentucky Derby, a horse got scratched, eliminated. And so he came in as the 24th horse in the race. Started from the back of the pack in one of the most amazing races people will speak to, and won the race. No pedigree, no background, no money, underrepresented, no sponsor, no mentor, no privilege, no parents with means and pedigree themselves. And really, it gave me goosebumps to watch it. But that 2 minutes summed up what this is all about.
Yeah.
Is that you can't just look at the pedigree. You just can't look at where they came from, who their parents, who schooled them. There's talent out there, and there's talent that is on that waiting list, that if you give it a chance, it can win the race. Rich Stripe, watch the YouTube video.
It was incredible. I remember seeing that as well. Just absolutely stunning. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, David. Thanks for everyone for joining us. There's a number of comments, which I'm sure Frank and David will pop back to have a look at. There's even a question there for you as well, Frank. I don't want to put you on the spot, but just in case you did want to answer it now, Danielle Fitzsimmons-Elliott asked what your response was to that MD that you mentioned earlier in the conversation.
I told him the facts don't lie.
This is why I love Frank.
Yeah.
So I actually gave him a little more long-winded one. It's an Einstein quote where he says, "Sometimes scientists, where if the facts don't fit the theory, change the theory."
Yes,
like it. Well, thank you, Danielle, for the questions, and thanks for answering it, Frank. Okay. Thank you both, gentlemen. Really pleasure to meet you, David. Thanks again, Frank, and we hope you took some value away from this today. I know that you will have done, and I'm looking forward to listening to it back because there was a lot of gems, a lot of humanity, and a lot of hope. I know hope's not a strategy, but I think there's a lot in this conversation. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.